Don't touch mine.
A very warm welcome from surprisingly cold Norway. This is Stranda. We're up at a height of about 1,000 meters above sea level, and with me, the new Range Rover. It's the fourth Range Rover in the family. It's called the Velar. You've seen it before, but now we tell you how it drives and everything else you want to know about it.
The Velar has been conceived as a new Range Rover model that will fit the chasm between the smallest Evoque and the larger Sport. When I first saw this car in April in New York, I argued whether that gap really needed to be filled, to be honest. Having spent 2 days with it, I can now say that I not only understand how it fits into the family, but also appreciate why Land Rover needed to make it.
Now, when the car first broke cover at Geneva in March, and then we brought you more details on it from New York in April, many of you had the question that many others had. Why has it been named Velar? Well, of course, Land Rover told us at the time that it goes back to the name given to the first prototype of the first Range Rover. So we're talking about just before about 1970. But why was that car named Velar? Now, that's the part I'm going to tell you right now. It was very simple to take the alphabets or the exact letters from the Land Rover badging and turn it around and make it Velar. That was one, but that's not the only reason. It's also Latin for to cover, and remember, this was the first time that Land Rover was going from a utilitarian sort of soft top to something that was a hard top, a little more luxurious, and definitely more appealing to a wider audience.
And so bringing that name back to life is actually rather special. Like all Range Rovers, this is a premium car with superior looks, great finish, a long equipment list, and Land Rover's legendary capability. Yet this is the most road-biased car from Land Rover yet. That said, this car will still do what you need to off-road. It has 650mm of wading capability, standard 4-wheel drive, terrain response, and with the optional air suspension, 251mm of ground clearance. Normally a rear-biased car, the Velar has a chain drive to transfer torque to the front when required. The car's design follows the Range Rover theme of being yacht-inspired, and yet things aren't as big and straight as you see on the other Ranges. And its sleek lines will captivate you, as will the very unique new daytime running lights and the gorgeous tail lights.
Now, the Velar occupies a position between the Evoque and the Range Rover Sport, which is, of course, not just in terms of pricing, but also in terms of size. So when you look at it, it's sort of ample, and yet it's not too large, it's not big and bulky, and it's also not too tall. That lends it its sporty character when it comes to the styling, really, because take a look at the way the roofline comes down. It really lends itself also to the whole dual tone story. I think it works really well with this car, perhaps more so than some of the others, just like it did with the Evoque when it first came out. It's also a lot sleeker. There's a lot more use of LEDs, both in the tail as well as in the front. And I promise you, these are gloss black wheels. We've had some fun with the car. And so, of course, yeah, it's gone triple tone now, hasn't it? But that's the other thing. You know, it's a good looking car. It's sophisticated. It's modern. And yet, put it out there into the elements and it looks completely at home. If anything, I think it looks even sexier now with all of that mud on it. The face is unmistakably Range Rover, or Land Rover really, and yet it is new. It's completely different. You don't have to look at it twice to try and figure out, hey, hang on, which model is that? And that's primarily because of the really slim headlamp and the signature of the daytime running light. Now, when you unlock the car, the other thing that happens is that you get these deployable door handles coming out, and that's another nice little trick. It doesn't just help aerodynamics, it does add to the style quotient of the car, and because it's a Land Rover, it couldn't be something delicate like on the F-Type or even a Model S from Tesla. It had to be chunky and yet be sleek. How do they do that? There you go. The whole thing comes out and you can pull it out with a nice shove. That is pretty cool.
The interior of the car is also yacht inspired and is rather simple yet extremely classy. The focus has been to reduce the clutter and allow the interior to have a bespoke feel. Rather a similar philosophy to what Volvo has begun doing of late.
Now, Land Rover prefers you don't use the word minimalist, but really that's what comes to mind because the cabin is so simple and it almost sort of brings in the outside in terms of the exterior design to the kind of language you see on the interior, and it is a big departure because when you compare to the Range Rover, which seemed like the best interior you'd ever seen, suddenly that looks dated and this looks really modern. Now, the car is full of all sorts of features and comforts that you would expect from a car in the premium space. So I'm not going to bore you with that, but the real talking point besides the way the cabin looks is how that screen pops out and how you have these 3 screens. The instrument cluster is virtual. That's not new, but these are, and it's called Touch Pro Duo because yes, there are 2 screens. And now this is what most people have been fascinated about, and now the new Audi A8 is using something similar. So you basically got all the car's functions, both in terms of its drivability and driver aids, and also of course the infotainment and everything you can do sitting on the inside, split between these 2 screens. So you could have the navigation map on the screen on top, so it's constantly on, but down here you could be getting into the vehicle setting and changing the drive modes or the terrain response. You could also go in and play around with the seats. There's a massage function of course at the top end, and climate control, it's all down here. And what's really cool is how the 2 dials have been integrated within that screen, and they're also, sort of embedded with a little bit of a display. So it is very different. It is very modern. It's something that's probably going to catch on quicker than you think, and certainly is something you should probably see getting into certain other vehicles from the JLR family.
System reload.
Panasonic's Magic Dial technology has been put to great use. First introduced at the Las Vegas Consumer Electronics Show in 2016, the focus of this new tech is to move to a buttonless future. And yet you have clever touches like the triple rotary dials almost floating on top of the screen. There is a slight sense of how the lower dash plastics could have been a tad better, and while I can't put my finger on it, there's a very slight sense of costs being shaved to accommodate all of this technological trickery. But don't get me wrong, the sunken recessed AC vents, the clean lines and flat surfaces are very sexy indeed. And those materials are well finished. The cars from JLR still don't get Apple CarPlay or Android Auto though. The Velar comes with 6 diesel and petrol engines that meet Euro 6 emission requirements. This spans the 4-cylinder 2-litre Ingeniums in both petrol and diesel, and so the entire range goes from 180 to 380 horses.
You can see the car has plenty of engine options, and what you really want to know is of course which ones of those we will be getting in India. So the 2-litre petrol, the 2-litre diesel, and also the 3-litre diesel. That's what we'll get at launch, and the 3-litre diesel is the car I'm driving now.
All-wheel drive capability and an 8-speed automatic gearbox are standard. And yes, that includes the paddle shifters. The 3-litre TD V6 is a beast. I know this engine well, and in the Velar it comes across as refined and powerful. It makes 296 horses and puts out a yummy 700 Nm of peak torque that kicks in as low as 1500 RPM. India will also get the smaller diesel, and the numbers are still pretty good. I've tested this engine on the heavier, larger cars like the Discovery, and I have to say it's quite the surprising pick of the pack for me. Very refined and surprisingly quick too.
The sound insulation is something that really just gets better and better with each new iteration or each new model from possibly every manufacturer now. On the Velar, you really get a sense of that, and it's a good thing, of course, because the car's luxury quotient kind of talks to this whole smooth, quiet cabin ride as well, and even the big wheels and even the diesel engine, most of that noise doesn't filter into the cabin at all.
And this is true of the petrol more so. Now, I did get the chance to drive the P380 or range-topping petrol V6, though India will get the P250 Ingenium. So let me show you its specs instead. I've driven a similar iteration of this very engine on other Land Rovers and have come away liking its eager nature. The 2-litre 246 bhp engine will give you good response, and I reckon it will do well on the Velar too. The one grouse I have is that there is not nearly enough feedback to the steering, especially on rough roads. While I understand this has been done to ensure a more refined feel, it is disconcerting. And the steering can be adjusted for reach and rake, but again I felt it should come out more towards the driver if so needed. Its telescopic reach is rather limited.
It's not just because this is the latest product from the JLR family, it's also because it's a Range Rover that it's really the epitome of everything that the brand represents in terms of technology, in terms of style and design and materials, and which is why you get an array of things that really surprise you in many ways on the Velar. When it comes to technology, of course, there's lots of onboard safety and driver aids as well, but I have to say that it's nice to also see the all-terrain progress control now making it onto the Range Rover family as well. All of the cars on this drive program have 22-inch wheels, which was a bit surprising to me considering there's a fair amount of off-roading, some rough roads that we're dealing with as well. But the car has done pretty well despite that. And you know what? It is the grip that you get from the car, the sense of confidence. That's the first thing that will grab you about the drive. And it's an inherently different character, really, to some of the other cars in the portfolio.
Its 81% aluminium body adds the stiffness you need to be able to provide the right dynamism on tarmac. The car's air suspension is standard on V6 models and optional on 4 cylinders, and will strike you as the biggest difference between this car and the Jaguar F-Pace, which is similar in size and price and with which it shares its platform. And so, like the Jaguars on this platform, the Velar also gets double wishbones at the front and an integral link setup at the rear. Now, this is in fact like a multi-link, but it also gets some lateral rigidity enhancing components. Being in Norway, we had the chance to drive the car on smooth highways, across bridges and through tunnels, and yes, find other locally conventional ways to get across fjords too. And day 2 of the drive brought even more such adventures.
Now, getting onto a ferry with your car is still pretty exotic and sort of novel for most of us. Here in Norway, not so much. Now, the last time I had my car driving into a ferry was when we were driving the F-Pace in Montenegro, interestingly enough. But here in Norway, coming back to that, there are over 51,000 islands. And so ferry crossings, like I said, very normal, very regular, getting across the fjords. And by the way, if it's not a ferry, then it's usually a bridge, and there are hundreds of those covering thousands of kilometers. And if it's not a bridge, you'll definitely have lots of tunnels on your drive. Breathtaking, spectacular, just doesn't cover it when it comes to the countryside we've been seeing. It's been gorgeous on every little turn. And of course that helps, but that's not the only reason why Land Rover has brought us here to Norway to drive this car. It's also a sense of Scandinavian style, the minimalist yet modern approach that the society has, which kind of relates very evenly to what this car represents, both in terms of its technology as well as its design.
The Range Rover Velar will come to India this very year, expected at prices ranging between 75 lakh and 1 crore rupees.